Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another discussion video. In today's video, we're talking about 10 cards you should consider side decking for the November 2020 format. Now, I know we're in a weird state of the world right now with COVID and everything. A lot of tournaments we're seeing and playing in right now are best of one tournaments. If you guys aren't playing many tournaments with a side deck right now, you can still get something from this video. Basically, what we're going to go through today are cards that are applicable against the meta that a lot of decks would normally side deck, but you could potentially, main deck tech some of these cards. Actually, a lot of them are main deck worthy if you need them to combat certain things. And if you're playing in a best of one tournament, if you have a unwinnable or really bad matchup and you need that main deck tech, this video will also help you figure that out, guys. So with that being said, if you are new here, definitely do subscribe, hit that bell to miss a video. If you want to help the channel out, there are a million links down in the description to do so. Particularly today, guys, if you want to buy or pre-order anything you see in the video, make sure to use my link down in the description to TCG Player. It really does help out a lot. That being said, let's just get started with number one. So the first thing we're talking about, this is probably the first card we talk about in every side decking video, but it's just always there, right? It's always one of the most applicable side deck cards, and that's Dark Power Black Mass Sand. This card floodgates your opponent from playing cheap cost battle cards using non-keyword skills. So where is this super applicable in the meta today? So this is really good against Red Broly, although with Draft Box 6, Red Broly does have a better answer to this card in the form of Piccolo Jr. Giant Force. Nonetheless, though, I mean, you're pretty much putting it on them to have the Giant Force in order to answer this card. If they don't have it, they're going to be in a really weird spot. And if you even do play it, let's just say you go first, you play it on one. On their turn one, they have to play the Piccolo instead of going into their Broly chain, which slows them down by pretty much an entire turn in terms of aggressing you. So that's really good there. This is also playable against Sin Shenron. Basically, if they're going to bring the ball back after their 9-drop or any of their cards get popped that bring things back from the drop area, this is pretty much going to floodgate them out of doing that. They're not going to want to discard 2 cards to do that, so that's really good there. And then another matchup this is very playable in are blue decks that are playing Obuni. We're seeing a kind of shift right now where not every blue deck is playing Obuni, or they're at least not playing for Obuni, but it's still a card that has good matchups. For instance, if you're playing Sin Shenron, you're up against a blue deck. If they play Obuni, that's a bad sign for you, right? So this is playable in that matchup if you want to floodgate out Obuni. There are the niche matchups for this card as well. Think about like Agents of Destruction. Think about like Vegex in some scenarios. This card has a lot of playability, so definitely consider it. Next up, we have Makikabora, the Broken Seal. I think this card is probably just as timeless as Dark Power Black Mass Sand. Definitely a newcomer to the scene, just coming out in set 10. But this card is so good in this particular format. It actually wasn't that great in the format it came out in, which again was set 10. But in set 11, this card is absolutely incredible. There are so many decks that just rely on chains, because basically when you play Makikabora, you call a character name and a cost. Your opponent cannot play that character name with that cost for the next turn. So basically you're turning your opponent's chains off. There's so many decks to get against. Think about Red Broly, Red Gogeta, Dark Broly, Green Gotenks, Sin Shenron. There are so many decks that this card is good against. Besides that, it's a 15k attacker, which gives it a playable stat there. And what's really funny is this card's actually main deckable in Dark Broly in particular because of the added once per turn, add up to 1 Dark Dragon Ball from your deck to your hand, then shuffle your deck. This thing has deflect, so its effect is pretty much always going to go through. There's nothing that's really going to stop Makikabora from floodgating the opponent. I will say though, you really want to play this card in a deck that has good follow-up. What I mean by that is you don't really want to play Makikabora in a deck where you're not going to be able to do anything following that turn, right? Let's say you're playing this in more aggressive deck like Dark Broly, for instance. You can play this and follow up with a lot of attackers in that same turn. But let's say you play this in Invoker or Sin, sometimes, yeah, it'll get you that extra turn you need to win the game. But if you play it in the middle of a game randomly and you don't have a lot of pressure to follow it up, if you don't have a good interruption to follow it up, it's going to be pretty lackluster. Your opponent's just going to get to that next turn where they're not floodgated by Makikabora and they're just going to kind of pop off on you. So you do have to be kind of smart with and when you play this card, but I think it's still an incredible card to consider in most decks that you're going to play in this format. Next up, we have Toa, Dark Demon Realm Scientist. Excuse me for the pretty bad picture. I know the foils, or the foiling rather, from Draft Box 6 was not amazing. But anyways, this unison is weird. There's a lot of scenarios where it's pretty bad, but there's a lot of scenarios where it's actually really good. So the main thing we're looking at here is that -4 activate main. Choose it to one of your opponent's battle cards and gain control of it. This card absolutely decimates Sin Shenron. Stealing their 9-drop Sin is kind of backbreaking. Let me explain why. A lot of you guys might not know this, but there's a ruling when it comes to taking control of your opponent's battle cards that dates back pretty far. I know this is relevant in like set 6 with like green starter Broly. You would steal their 1-drop Broly, and your opponent doesn't get to use any of the effects when you steal it. Why is that? Because when you steal a battle card, right, the effect goes pending. Let's say it has an effect that says when it leaves the battle area, do X. That effect goes pending when you steal it, but when it resolves, it is in your battle area. You're now the controller of the battle card, so you resolve any and all effects that would happen when that battle card leaves the original owner's battle area. So in the instance of 9-drop Sin Shenron, when you play this card and steal their 9-drop, you draw 2 cards. It's kind of crazy that way. There are some other matchups where this is playable, like Green Gotenks, for instance. You can steal Grim Reaper. Your opponent doesn't get back any of their Gotens or Trunkses from their drop area. That's really good there. This card, though, it is going to cost you 4 or at least 3, and then putting another copy of Toa under it in order to use that effect. So it is costly. It's not going to be playable in every deck, but like I think in blue, for instance, where you have a lot of energy manipulation, or maybe even green, where possibly you could follow up with a dormant as long as you have an energy open. But there are going to be certain scenarios where this card isn't incredible, but if you have a follow-up defense for this, if this requires you to tap out, I think that's going to actually be very, very helpful. So I think this is a good card for those scenarios where you want to steal battle cards that have effects when they leave the field, but you don't want to necessarily warp them or KO them because you don't want your opponent to get those effects. Hopefully that word jumbling makes sense. And if you didn't just like absolutely destroy Sin enough, this card I think also has a lot of playability. Toa Twisted Sister, counterplay. When you play it, draw 1, and then you shuffle 1 card your opponent's drop back into their deck. So one of the reasons that Dark Broly has such a good Sin Shenron matchup is because they're able to remove the negative energy Dragon Balls from Sin's drop area, and then remove Sin, and then Sin doesn't get that much value out of it dying, right? They get to draw 2, but they don't get to restart their entire chain essentially for free. So Toa Twisted Sister is a card that has half of that effect. It allows you to shuffle the negative energy Dragon Ball back into the opponent's deck, and then if you have like a follow-up removal, maybe an overall, maybe a max power Kamehameha for the Sin, you're going to get that same value that Dark Broly gets, minus the ginormous swings, right? But this card has playability in other scenarios. You can shuffle back Rebrand, Punishing Passion. You can shuffle back Sand Instincts. So in those scenarios, this card is quite good, and it also plays and draws. So basically a 1-drop cantrip. You can't ask for much more than that, but it also interrupts your opponent's drop area, which nowadays with Dragon Ball Super, the drop area is incredibly important. So wanted you guys to be aware of that. And then one more time, if you just weren't giving it to Sin Shenron enough, if you just weren't doing enough to just make the Sin Shenron player cry, you can play Max Power Kamehameha. Although truthfully, this card has reach in so many matchups. Again, like I named off before, you have Dark Broly, Red Gogeta, Sin Shenron, Green Gotenks. There are so many matchups where Max Power is good that if you're not already maining it, this is definitely a card that should be in your side deck. But like I talked about earlier in the video, if you need main deck text in a best of 1 scenario to beat certain matchups, Max Power is probably one of the cards that should be on top of your list. It's just so versatile. It negates, it removes, it's just so good. Definitely consider playing this card if you're not playing it already. Next up, we have Borgos Bardock's Crewmate. This is basically representing all the new silver bullets from Draft Box 6. Basically, they're 1-drop cantrips, and they say if your opponent untaps by a counter skill, you place one of their life and their energy in the drop area. So this is particularly good side deck against Blue Baby. Blue Baby relies on a lot of counters, basically Dimension Magic, Revenge Big Bang Attack, a lot of their counter plays. When they use them, they untap energy, and that's how Baby can kind of extend its defense into the rest of its turn. So this card and this like slew of cards particularly destroys Baby in that sense, but it's still decent against Blue, right? Like Blue still plays Dimension Magic. Turning their Dimension Magic into a regular negate can be the make or break you need to beat them. And I think in particular, this is going to be really good in aggro decks that want that to happen, right? Like against mid-range, for instance, if you're playing mid-range against Blue and they don't have access to Dimension Magic, well, I guess they probably don't really have to be too scared of dying on the spot that turn, right? It's just not something they have to fear in that regard. But if you're playing an aggro deck, like let's say you're playing Red Broly and you play the Mai, for instance, and you turn off their Dimension Magics, Blue is going to have an infinitely harder time defending you early, which I think actually can make or break a lot of those types of matchups. So I would consider these cards a lot in aggro if you're more so siding them for Blue in general, but any deck can side these cards in the Blue Baby matchup. So just keep that in mind. Next up, guys, we have Secret Identity Mass Sand. This card is another stapley side deck card where you just need it sometimes for the board wipe. You can be up against like AOD, you can be up against Obuni, and you just need those token board wipes to basically clear the board, not get overwhelmed in advantage, at least board advantage. This card is absolutely incredible. Most decks can play it now. We don't have a ton of sparking effects anymore, so most decks can play it and be pretty well off. Piccolo Demonic Transformation, play this card in the side deck if you are playing yellow. With the way this card is ruled, in case you guys didn't know, you can use this in response to a Unison, which you can actually use any counterplay in response to a Unison. This card can actually negate the skills of a Unison being played as long as the opponent is paying 4 or less for that. This card is incredible against blue in particular, where they're trying to play the Baby Unknown Parasite Unison. You play this in response, you get a 15k attacker that can then attack that Unison, and your opponent cannot +2 to draw the card. So you're going back into your next turn, your opponent's Unison only has 3 markers as opposed to 5, and you have this card to attack into it. You probably have your leader to attack into it. This card, with the way it's ruled, is absolutely incredible. It can negate the skills of the Unison as long as it's being played for 4 energy or less. So anyways, moving on, we have Dirty Burst in blue. I love this card. I think it's good. This card is good as a 1-of tech option. I think it's good as a 2-of in the side deck. It's basically a regular negate, but it also offers the counterplay for 2 energy of, you know, basically saying I don't die to any secret rare this turn. So you have like Cell Xeno, you have the Victory Strike in Invoker, you have Fu Shrouded in Mystery, you have Red Broly SCR. There's so many SCRs. This card just says, okay, the turn you play it, I don't die. This card, in my opinion, is absolutely incredible. Definitely consider it in the side deck if you are playing blue. And finally, guys, this is like a 3-for-1 thing here. We have some options against hand control. A lot of people still have struggles against hand control. You have a few options here. Not Even a Scratch is kind of like a stand-in for Sand Instincts. Of course, if you have Sand Instincts, play or side deck Sand Instincts. But this is more of a budget alternative. This basically does a very, very similar thing. Basically, it's half the thing of Sand Instincts. You pay 1, draw 1 instead of pay 2 to draw 2, right? And you have the option of counter-attacking. But realistically, if your opponent makes you use a discard skill, you just discard Not Even a Scratch, get the draw off it later on. Same thing you would do with Sand Instincts. Beerus Godly Majesty, if your opponent is making you discard via battle card effects, you can play Beerus Godly Majesty off that, so you really don't lose much card economy there. And then Dr. Wiro is a little bit more of a reach card in terms of Beerus Godly Majesty, because it plays itself off of your opponent's discard no matter what skill it is, right? So as where Beerus Godly Majesty would only play if your opponent uses a battle card skill to make you pitch, Wiro basically says, okay, Rebrian or any other card that isn't technically considered a battle card because it doesn't happen in the battle area, Dr. Wiro gets to resolve and give you a free body. But anyways, guys, I hope this video helped you out. Definitely drop the comments below if you have any recommendations for other side deck or main deck techs you guys want other people to know about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.